All right, folks. So welcome to Exception Handling Compliance as Code. If you were planning to be here, you're in the right spot. If you weren't planning to be here, you are not in the right spot. Now is the right time to get up and move. I was hoping some of you would leave.
Oh, man. So I guess everybody's pretty excited. Okay.
So anyway, so we're here to talk kind of how we do some of these things going forward in the new world. And we'll just kind of get this started off real quick. We'll start off with me. I'm Galen, the kid, Emery. This is what I get for letting John build the slides, apparently. I manage the Chef Solution Architects for the West Coast. I'm an escapee of what we like to call Fed Island over here at Chef. I ran a bunch of the federal business for Chef for the last couple of years before I took over the West Coast team. I've been with Chef for over 5 years now, which is a terrifyingly large amount of my career, but it's been a fantastic journey, and I actually now get to live in San Diego. So sorry to everybody who doesn't live in San Diego. I love it. It's fantastic. And no, I'm not moving to your city. Fundamentally not going to happen. That's you, Brad. I'm not moving to your city.
That's you, Brad, especially.
Yeah. All right, and here we got John.
Yeah, so my name is John Snow. Yes, that is my real name. That isn't my picture, but sometimes I feel like it should be. I'm a senior software development engineer on the Solutions and Content team. The Solutions and Content team is what we build basically all of the really awesome content inside of Automate and all the content that we showed this morning in the keynote. I joined Chef in January of 2017, though it feels like it was a lot longer than that for some reason.
Time moves slowly on Fed Island.
Yeah, I mean, I am not officially on Fed Island. I'm like a bush pilot, and I fly in every once in a while, try to help out a bit, and then fly back as quickly as physically possible. So
you fly in the supplies that we use to build the raft.
That's basically how we build.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are we actually going to talk about today? It's pretty straightforward. We're going to start with a little bit about the security benchmarks and standards that we all operate with. And really a lot of this talk is about how do we handle the exceptions to those baselines. So we're going to talk a bit about how that stuff works today, how we audit systems today, and then we'll talk about what we're looking at in the new world of effortless infrastructure and effortless audit with Chef. And then we'll let John deep dive in kind of the fundamentals of how this stuff worked from this morning. And then we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. So to get into this real quick, the baseline, right? So there's a lot of ways in which we can harden systems, but the two biggest ones we run into are the Center for Internet Security benchmarks or the DISA STIGs. CIS is used most commonly in the commercial side, though there are a number of agencies and governments that are using it as well. DISA STIG is used mostly by those people crazy enough to be in Department of Defense and intelligence communities because they're ridiculous. Why do we do these things? Why do these exist? Why is this important? Well, because our systems are constantly under attack, right? I'm sure a lot of you are in large enterprises who actually have had to deal with large distributed targeted attacks, but even those of us who aren't are often at times rendered powerless by a new virus, a new zero-day, even old issues, right? I think it was the Apache Cupid was one of the big hacks that happened a while back on unpatched systems, right? So in 2017, there were 130 large-scale targeted attacks. That number is growing by 27% yearly. And of the almost 20,000 known software flaws, only 14 of them were 0 days, right? What we're seeing is that there's a huge amount of risk to our systems. A lot of people want to get access to our data. A lot of people want to bring our systems down. A lot of things want to happen there. And the majority of the flaws they use to exploit that are known vulnerabilities, insecure systems, unpatched systems, things of that nature. And so when we're thinking about compliance and security, most of the time we're not thinking about CIS or STIG as the actual thing, but we're actually thinking about the higher level rules that we have, like PCI and SOX in the financial world, HIPAA in the medical world, and then NIST and similar things for federal and government, which are really what I like to refer to as a soft control, right? They're things like you must have appropriate access control mechanisms on your systems so that somebody can't do things they're not allowed to do. Well, that's a great rule, but how do I actually implement that? How do I actually enforce that? Usually it's a CIS or a STIG in the background. That's actually what we're looking at here. And so John, what does it look like? You've been in this world. What does it look like to actually look at the CIS?
So let's look at like an example, right? So here we have a CIS. This is 100% from the CIS benchmark. And let's just looking at that, can you tell me what the check is? Well, you can't because you have to scroll down to see the check itself, right? But I mean, there's a lot of data about what this, so we're looking at the Windows Server benchmarks, but we have a bunch of different categories, right? We have account policies, we have some event logs. There's a lot of data, right? There's a lot of stuff that you have to parse through and read, and then you have to translate into something that's automated, right? Or what you could do is you could do the worst thing, which is basically sit there and try to manually go through that, and then you will never touch all of your systems, right? So let's look at like what, fortunately somebody decided that, hey, maybe we should put a little bit of this in code. And so what they did is they basically built SCAP, and they basically put it all, and this is XML, right? And so this is an example of that exact same control as a SCAP, as an XCCDF, right? Can anybody tell me how we check this one? No, we can't, because it's really difficult to read, right? Like, yeah, super difficult to read, right? So it would be really nice if we had something that was a little bit better. So if you can click to the next one, this is inspec, right? So that's that same control that we just looked at, but now it's in a human readable form, and this is what we're looking at, and this is what we want to get to, right? And this is our goal. So like, as we think about this, the more that we automate this, the more we put it as code, then the easier it is to have conversations, not only like with people who actually run the systems, but then with the people who are in security who are responsible for checking and managing our audits.
Yeah, and I think the key component here is that, first off, this is a lot easier to read than the previous slide, right? Just to make sure you understand the difference. This is the same thing as this.
Well, and this isn't even all of it. Like, let's be clear, this is just the definition rule ID. This isn't even the test. Like, there's a test, and then there's some other stuff beneath that, right? So like that code right there was the first 3 lines of this.
And so what inspec allows us to do here is to get all of that metadata, all that detail and things that John is talking about in the SCAP, in the XML, get it into a readable format so that we can all look at it and understand it, not just those of us who've been staring at XML for 20 years. And so this is a single control from the baseline, and these are just the things that we have to start to do on our systems. The problem we run into in terms of taking this today and going out there and applying it is that the next step on this is not so much to go audit the whole system and figure everything out, but actually understand what are the exceptions we have to the policy, right? So everybody runs exceptions to the baseline. If you don't believe me, have you set no exec on /temp? All right, some of you have actually set that appropriately. Many of us, however, have COTS applications or other things, or even applications we wrote that actually use exec on /temp, and therefore we have to file an exception for that rule, right? It's a very, very common exception we see in the enterprise, and that's in the CIS 1.1.5 and the STIG Red Hat 6 528, right? That's a common rule across it, and there's dozens, if not hundreds of those across the entire enterprise. And if you don't have that exception, what about Telnet server? I literally ran into that in a customer 2 weeks ago, where they said, we run Telnet as part of the application stack. And I said, cool, that's great. I would like to leave now. What about X, right? So there's always an exception to it, because anything that's secured to 100% is a boat anchor, flat out, 100%. It's a great concrete buoy to work with, but it's unusable for normal operations. So what we deal with is these exceptions, and here's the ways it works today. First off, is the most common one we run into is after a scan happens and security comes to John and says, hey, John, you have a finding on your security report.
Oh, man, I have an exception for that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Straight up. Just, no, I have an exception. Oh, who knows about it? Shelly does. She's the person who controls that record, right? We also have a component of perpetual versus time-based, right? Hey, John, you got 90 days to fix it.
Cool.
Did you fix it in those 90 days?
No.
Okay,
usually
you get 90
not.
more days.
Yeah, and then at that, yeah.
And they're either per system or type of system, so there's a lot of management that has to work that's not across your entire fleet. You don't get to have an exception for password security policies across your entire 100,000 systems just because you don't want to manage that separately for the components.
Yeah, and another thing we're talking about in here is we're looking at things like there needs to be a process around this, right? Because you have to have it, and like somebody is an authority. Somebody has to take that risk. And when we talk about security, we're talking about defense in depth, right? We're trying to limit the risk. And so it's potential that like the reason that I don't have to fix that is because I have like 20 different layers of security before you get to that thing, right? And so like we want to basically, like somebody needs to make those decisions, somebody needs to think about that stuff. Like exceptions are not a bad thing. These like the security standards are recommendations for a purpose to basically give you the strongest security possible, but you need to think about it in a risk management like framework.
Absolutely. And so one of the key components here is that often this is all done manually today, right? So either in a spreadsheet, maybe a PDF, maybe a paper file, but somebody somewhere has the record in paper, not attached to the systems themselves, about what is and is not an acceptable security control or acceptable waiver for the components. So for a good example of how the actual audit happens, I'm going to turn it back over to John. He was tasked with an annual audit by his Lord Commander.
Yeah, so it's basically, yeah, I know, right? So like, let's say that we talk about an annual audit. So I'm a system engineer working at an organization, and I have to do a CIS scan. Let's say I have 100 servers, and let's say that I'm using, like at this point, I know nothing about inspec, right? So we have to do that with SCAP. If we take the SCAP scan tool, it takes about 15 minutes per server, okay? We're looking at several days for one engineer to scan those systems, right? Imagine if that is now like hundreds, imagine if that's 1,000 servers or 10,000 servers or however many servers you have. Now you're looking at the largest problem is that you're not gonna actually touch all of your systems. You're gonna have vulnerabilities in there because you're not continuously running this. You're running this at a one time and there's gonna be mistakes, right? The auditor then comes in and they're gonna have to do the same thing, right? The auditor's there for 5 days. Okay, so they're 5 days to do 100 systems. They're gonna touch one of your domain controllers, one of your Exchange servers, maybe like one of your web servers, and that's it, right? And you're good, right? It's not like you have 4 of those, and like the one that they touched happens to be the one that you told them about, that you know you secured. Yeah, that's not the thing that we do, right? Yeah, that's 100% what we do. And so like so there's a lot of like holes in that. But instead, and then like remediation, okay? Now we're talking about we've actually found vulnerabilities. If all my time is spent scanning the system manually, like where's the time for remediation? Where's the time for the fact that for me to actually do dev testing? Where's the pipeline, right? Now we're talking about like, just time builds up and eventually it just becomes the thing that drags us down.
Yeah, so we can see there's a huge time sink component to this. And the other one I want to highlight is this is from another customer. This is the time in delay that it takes to make this thing happen. That's a real whiteboard that we drew, trying to outline the entire waiver process for how security exceptions happen. So what happens is over the weekend, systems are scanned. They are scanned automatically or semi-automatically. By Wednesday, that report is sent to security. And on Thursday, they triage the top 10. One of the things that happens in that triage meeting is that there's literally a person who knows of the waivers and therefore speaks up and says, no, that group has a waiver for that particular thing. If that person is in the meeting, then those waivers aren't known about, they're not applied. The scan has no concept of the waiver itself, right? Fundamentally, it's gonna come back and report the false positive every single time. And then here was the part that was most interesting. Those question marks are because nobody really knows how long from that meeting to when the fixed tickets get created. Because sometimes those fixed ticket emails come out on Friday, but sometimes they come out on Wednesday. If the meeting happened on Thursday, well, you couldn't have sent it the day before the meeting. So when was the meeting that we had to have it happen? So there's a random delay in this process. We have no idea how long it actually takes for somebody to get a fixed ticket for a security exception. So and they have 1 week to fix or to request the waiver. So the minimums we identified is that it's 5 days minimum to identify that you have a vulnerability on one of your systems. And so the minimum time to fix is, of course, at 5 days. The maximum time is we don't actually know that like those waiver or those fixed ticket requests didn't necessarily come out on Thursday after that meeting. So there's some delay in the process there that nobody in the room had any understanding of, right? And we were in the room with the engineers whose job it is to fix the systems. So this is a huge component in terms of the delay we have here. And so really this is what we want to get into in terms of how do we extend the effortless infrastructure you saw today in the keynote to help manage this particular process and really to get to the point where security and compliance and infrastructure can really kind of come together and work holistically on the same problem. So for that, we're going to start scanning to a demo and see if we switch properly. Haha!
Sweet. It's so good when we actually switch and things work. Okay. So this should look really familiar, right? We have automate, and we basically have a node that's out here in scanning. And this is how we start this, is let me preface this. So like number one, this node is an entirely different node than the one we scanned this morning, right? And this is an entirely different Automate server than the one we scanned this morning.
This is because John didn't want me to screw up with his
Because I don't want to
demo.
screw up Keynote. But the good news is this is exactly the same package, 100%. So like what we're doing is we're using the exact same CIS package that we scanned before. And we'll go take a look at that, right? Once it clicks. Okay, so now we basically have exactly that same package that we looked at before. And the best part about this is because it's wrapped in Habitat. We're using the power of Habitat and to deliver this software to our servers, right? So let's look at, so we have Chef Automate here. And let's go look at our node and see what we have. Okay, so the benefit of an Automate and running this continuously is that we can see that we do have failures, but we can also go look at the scan history and see that we have been failing this all day. But this is an automated thing. This is 100% like there's a lot of benefits in Automate. We have role-based access control, which allows basically, so now this is the same pane of glass that the security auditor can look at this potentially, as well as the engineer, okay? We can go into this scan, we can actually look at the data for the critical control, and we can view that same readable code that we had before. This is, right? We can read some information about this, and we can actually see that physical test, right? And this is super important because now we're again, code is collaboration, we're having a conversation about this test, and we're able to do that through code, all right? And the other thing that we kind of want to do is we want to be able to also, maybe not all of you, your security people are comfortable reading inspec, but maybe you have a system out there that allows you to basically open and close tickets, right? You probably have some incident management, you have some change request process, right? So one of the benefits of Automate is we can use webhooks and notifications to actually take this scan data and send it to a system like ServiceNow, right? So we've done that, we've configured a webhook, and we actually have it sending data to ServiceNow, and we can go look at, if I can spell, we have no records because we didn't turn the flow back on, right?
No, you're in the wrong. No, go back to incidents. You seem to be in the chef incident. Search for incident again.
Which one?
Search for incident.
Hold on, let's just clear all. And we're gonna, this is the best part about trying to search through this.
We are not ServiceNow experts.
Yeah,
That wasn't
if it's not apparent.
patently obvious.
Some of, yeah.
So while John gets that pulled up, what I want to talk about here, though, is the key is that we can get this data to where you may want to use it or where your security teams are going to want to use it. And so if we go ahead and just search for incident, and then I think we're just, ServiceNow has multiple incident options. There you go, failed profiles under chef incidents.
There we go.
So this is a list of every control that is failing on that system that John has scanning, and every time it checks in, we can create an incident off this. This is a little verbose. This is really truly a proof of concept component. Please don't think that this particular implementation of the ServiceNow integration is a Chef product. We do have a direct integration with ServiceNow. It is a bit cleaner than what we've got here today. It just wasn't quite what we wanted to do for this particular demo. And so this is really straightforward. There's not a whole lot of detail in here because we don't need a whole lot on this at the moment. But really, it just gives us the name of the control, the version of the profile it's coming from, the UID of the scan ID, and then the control ID itself that we can then use to make some decisions with.
Cool. And then the other thing that we can do in ServiceNow or in a system like Remedy, or if you're using any of the other ticketing systems, is we're going to create a flow, right? And that's the most critical component here is like once we have this incident, we need to do something with it, okay?
And so this is pretty straightforward. And what we're saying here is, hey, look, when we get a failed profile, and this is an automatic trigger on this particular case, but you can set this up any way you would like. Someone could request this, et cetera. When that happens, it's actually going to ask somebody in security for approval. We're saying, hey, if this control fails, ask someone for approval of the waiver. We're saying if this is an approved exception to the baseline, then we're going to go ahead and create we're going to create a change request that we're going to then send back into operations.
Yeah.
So is that activated? Or we have old ones, right?
Yeah, so we go look at an open change. Let's see what we have. Yeah, so we basically have an open change, right? And so this fires. We now can see some data about this, right? Once it opens. Yeah, and now we can basically see where we're at. And one of the nice things about this is we've kind of modified this flow a little bit because we know that this comes from Automate. We can just automatically schedule this because the security team has approved this waiver, right? And so now what we should do, now there's a couple of things that we could have done here. So ServiceNow gives us the ability to do REST calls. So we could do something crazy and we could totally like run a REST call out. And then that same TOML file that I showed this morning, we could build that and just automatically push that out to that node, right? We've chosen not to do that. We had a little bit of technical hiccups.
Just because ServiceNow. Don't.
Exactly.
That's all that matters.
Yeah, and so instead what we've done is we basically have here is it's scheduled. And so now I, as the engineer, can look at this and it's assigned to my team and I can take action based off of this.
So let's go ahead and go through a full approval. We need to turn on that flow, though.
Yeah. So all right.
Activate.
We'll just activate this flow.
And so what we're going to do here is we're literally going to send a notification into ServiceNow. I will approve the flow, or I will approve the exception to the waiver, and then that'll create a change ticket for John to work on.
Yeah.
So John's just going to kick off Chef real quick, or inspect. You know what my favorite thing in the world is watching someone type live on a big screen. Because it's never clean.
Right, I remember what I did. Yeah, so we're gonna actually, this is gonna be the best part. We're gonna flip that off for a second while I fix the secrets that I changed. So another part of security, super important, secrets management is critical. It's also very important to rotate your secrets,
So what we're going to do is we're going to scan the system for compliance. And again, the key here is we want to meet them where they are, right? Automate is a great pane of glass, a great thing to work with. Your security and compliance teams may not be familiar with it. They may have their own ways to track incidents, to track work, et cetera. So we want to make sure we can import that data into that tool. That approval from security compliance is going to create the work order for engineering. The engineering is going to be able to create the updated profile with the waiver built in, and then we'll be able to rescan the system without having a false positive going forward.
Yeah, you can flip back over.
Can we flip back over? You sure?
Yeah, it's fine.
All right.
Okay. So we can see that we actually have a whole bunch of approvals.
We've been working on this for a little bit.
Yep.
So this is just literally the approval dashboard in ServiceNow. We haven't done anything to it. And when that flow kicks off, it'll kick off a request for one of us to approve. And if we do so, it changes the state of the record, or the table record in ServiceNow. And as part of that process, it'll then trigger that change request to John.
Yeah, and so once I have that change request, then I can do something as simple as so I can pull that data out of the change request. And the nice thing so this is where it's really important to start talking about those profiles. So the profiles themselves are, we utilize the control ID as an attribute. And so when we look at this control ID, it's super important to understand that this control ID is the name of the attribute as well, okay? And so just like we showed in the keynote this morning, we can go grab that data and directly pull it in. And the only thing we have to do is we have to replace the periods with underscores. That's because, YAML doesn't like periods. And once we do that, running this against the system is as simple as a habconfig apply. So. And then, so let's flip it off, and I'm going to actually log into the system, and we're going to show it up in a second.
So we're about to rescan the system, and then when we rescan the system, what we're going to be able to get is the true state of the node, right? Not just, hey, how does this look against a generic CIS benchmark, but how does this work against our specific set of controls that we expect to be true for this particular system, right, or set of systems we're working with. And that's the point at which we can then initiate the remediation work for any outstanding controls that we don't have waivers for, anything that we're saying, hey, no, you actually do have to go out and fix this particular component. John's working on secrets management.
Yes.
You ready for me to flip back to you?
Yeah, you flip back now
Okay.
as the node comes up. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the worst thing possible. We're going to RDP into this session because secrets are hard. So as we log in, what we're going to see is we're going to see habitat come up as soon as we get in. Anyways, anybody know any good jokes? That's the best way. This is what happens when you have live demos.
Live demo, conference Wi-Fi, RDP.
Yeah,
That's really,
we tried to maximize.
We were ambitious. We were very ambitious.
And we also did ServiceNow too. So I mean, like, how many different ways can we maximize the amount of pain that we could have?
We were ambitious and failed, John. The lesson is never try.
Yeah, it's not true. Anyway, all right.
You have an update for Visual Studio Code.
I do. All right. Well, the good news is we're going to actually do something totally different. Well, no, there we go. Okay. Yeah, it's too slow. Let's do something different.
All right.
Yeah, flip it back over.
Flip back up. Cool.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to do something that's a little bit more fun. This is what happened.
Off script.
Totally off script, so everybody's cool with that. So the good news is that the keynote is over, so I can totally use that node that I know I have 100% access to because of this morning. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit crazy. So give me 1 second while I log on. Close that. All right, we're almost there.
Let me know when you're ready. Or if you're not ready.
Go for it. Flip it over.
Flip.
All right. So we're actually going to, I'm not ready yet. Right, that's why.
It's chef123.
It helps use the right username. Cool.
Secrets management is hard.
Secret management. That's the other component. Secrets management is hard. All right, so we're going to look at that system from this morning. Okay, so we basically saw in the keynote that we basically had this node. We ran an application. We see that it's passing, right? So we're going to go a little bit off script for a second, and we're going to talk about like how. So we have these script controls here, but wouldn't it be really sweet if we actually could just skip all of them? So what we're going to do is we're going to do something that's a little bit crazy. So what we do is so we're exposing every single one of these controls as an attribute for the habitat package itself. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually get all of them. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come back here, keeping that exactly the same. This is 100% approved. And then what we're going to do is we're going to replace true. We're going to be case sensitive. We see that we have 279, right? Everybody sees 279, or is that too small?
There are 279 trues in that document.
There are 279 trues, which just so happens to be the 279 controls in this profile. And we're going to set all of them to false. Okay. We're going to set remediation back to true, though, because I do care. All right. And so now what we're going to do is, because we would say that we would do our exceptions, we're actually do hab config apply. And we're going to let that thing run. All right. And so now we can talk about, so this is the exact same thing that you would do if you were talking about these exceptions, right? So now you could have an automated system that would build this TOML file for you, and then using the power of Habitat and the remote supervisor and secrets management, which is super important, you could basically have that automatically kick off that exception for you. And now you no longer need somebody to basically be, you no longer need that process. You need the process for the approval, but you no longer need to basically like physically touch the system to do that exception. And what this does is this eliminates a lot of things, right? So we talked about this morning in the keynote. There are some key things that eliminates. Number one, you don't have to write an inspect profile with Ruby in it. You don't have to then maintain that profile. You don't have to maintain it as inspect upgrades every single time. And you also don't have to maintain a pipeline that basically tests that profile. And that means that you don't have to maintain pipeline infrastructure around that, right? So that's just all the wonderful things about this profile. So,
you want to pull it up and automate now that's right?
Yeah, let's make sure that it's run. Let's go back to automate, the right one. Let's hit refresh. And let's see where we're at. Maybe we and we wait. Okay. Let's go back to compliance. And sure enough, there we go. We have a node, and you'll notice that node is skipped.
So that's the easiest way to pass your audits, by the way. Just skip all the controls.
Just skip all the controls. We don't need this anymore. So yeah, so we just basically showed, so that's that process, right? So we're now managing it, and we can now skip all 279 controls.
So that is a critical component, right? Being able to toggle these things on or off appropriately. And as John said, this really should be built as part of your pipeline, as part of your structure, because you don't want an individual being able to do this outside of the strict approval process. One of the key other components here is perpetual versus time-based, right? This is some pseudocode, but basically we can put in those kinds of checks and say, hey, unless the time is expired, unless we're past this, the way we did it before with the customers is like, if we're past this date in time, which we put 6 months out or 3 months out, then the thing is set to false so that we don't skip it anymore. Sorry, I set it to true at that point so that you actually make sure you go look for that waiver or look for that control direct at that point in time. But until then, we skip it, we don't count it, it's not part of the remediation set, et cetera. And there's a couple different ways we can do that as well. We can also make it happen in a way where we run it, but we just set the criticality to 0. So you go, hey, I know that this thing still isn't fixed, but it's also not impacting my score from a security or compliance standpoint. The key here is that the attributes drive the profile, right? Because this is an inspect, because this is in habitat managed inspect, we can actually run this through with attributes and drive that behavior automatically as code. And so just kind of recap, what we've been talking about is straightforward. We define the source of truth for the approved security baseline, right? So the source of truth is that profile, is that artifact running with habitat with inspect. We can reduce the time to detect from 5 days to under 5 minutes. It's even faster if the systems are, if it's not a live demo, if you're doing it for real in your infrastructure, it goes much faster than us doing it on stage. We can increase the visibility into the security waiver process, right? We can go meet them where they are. Maybe it's in Remedy, maybe it's in ServiceNow, maybe even it's in Jira or somewhere else. We can go get the data to them, have them run the approval process through it, track that as code, or at least track that back into the the auditing components that exist inside those tools, and then bring that data back into our stuff as attributes that we can then use to drive the profile. And the time to remediate, again, we can automate this entire process, get it down to under 5 minutes, and we can help automate those interactions between security and infrastructure teams. I think one of the things that we talked about a bit last year at ChefConf was about the contracts between teams, the contract between the applications and things. We want to really codify that interaction and say, hey, look, the interaction is very clear. I'm going to come to you and ask for a waiver. Your job is then to go evaluate the waiver with all the information I've given and then give back a response. That doesn't need to be in paper. That doesn't need to be over the phone. Doesn't need to be Excel spreadsheets. It should be code. We should absolutely make that a codified interaction between teams. And so the idea here is that we can all focus on delivering value securely. And with that, we'll open up for any Q&A. Thank you. So we've got Stuart walking around with a microphone. Feel free to raise your hand, and we'll.
In any question. No, I'm just kidding. Go for it.
Right down here.
No Game of Thrones spoilers, as not everybody has seen it, just so we're clear.
Does this in any way connect with policies and remediation?
Policies like mitigation,
Remediation.
remediation.
Yeah, so I mean, like, so one of the things that we didn't really talk about, which, and like, we'll go into this a bit. So like, one of the pieces that was, because I only have 5 minutes in a keynote, right? So one of the things that's important about these packages is we did the policies and the remediation. So maybe we take a look at, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a look at this server itself, and we'll see that it did set some things. But like, let's say that we also take that same process that we talked about being attribute driven for a profile, and we actually take that and apply it to the cookbook itself. And that is super small. And that's smaller.
Enhance.
So let's
Enhance.
Enhance. So now we can basically take a look at this. So like, this is an example, this is kind of a prototype that we've been working on. We can take those controls and we can basically build them into attributes the same way that we have in the profile. You notice that the name is identical, and that's super important, right? Because when we skip it, what we want to do is we like in a provisioner, let's say that we had a TOML that basically is going to set that during provisioning, then we want to skip that remediation if we have a waiver for it, right? Because we have a waiver, maybe we don't want to break it, right? And so that this is an example of that. And we can see as we scroll here that one of those ones that I showed in the keynote, that there we go, that we have that set to false. And what that would do is that would then turn off the remediation for that thing. Does that make sense? We do that, now that these are special packages to do that, and that also requires special cookbooks to get to that point.
So the point being is that that attribute has to be tied to the cookbook. The cookbook understands how to ingest that as part of its control for it. Yeah. And there's a lot of ways in which people have built these remediation cookbooks as rules, right? So one of the things you would want to do if you want to drive that as attribute-based behavior is set those attributes. As John said, set the attribute that you're looking for in the cookbook the same as the attribute we're looking for in that inspect profile.
I'm coming.
So I keep hearing this audit cookbook paradigm term being thrown around a lot, and from what it sounds like, it's not the recommended approach of doing things because you don't want, I guess you don't get the advantages of using the habitat profiles.
So you're talking about specifically about the audit cookbook itself. So the audit cookbook is a thing to allow you to basically run profiles on a system. It helps you because you can specify using Chef to basically run your profiles. Now what we're showing here, 100% is the effortless audit pattern. And we feel that that adds a lot of benefits to running profiles. And it's not to say that the audit cookbook pattern is wrong. It's just that we think that running the effortless way brings you a lot of benefits.
One of the key things we can do with inspect, particularly with the effortless audit style of inspect, is we can run it without Chef at all, right?
Yeah.
So the audit cookbook pattern requires you to put Chef on the box and run Chef on the box, which is really powerful if we're going to do remediation. But step one in any large organization is not to go out and hit 1,000 servers with a remediation cookbook that says, hey, harden my systems. The first step is to go out there and say, what is the current state? Because I don't know, right? And so the audit cookbook, while can be effective there, we've run into a lot of times where security teams are like, you can't put Chef on the boxes yet. We don't trust it. We don't trust you. We don't trust the code, et cetera. So having inspect be a standalone component in whichever way you want to run inspect, in particular the effortless style, is really quite effective. Really allows you to get that breadth of knowledge across your fleet very quickly without a risk to making changes to your infrastructure, right? The audit cookbook does do a great job of running, particularly in if you want to couple it with the Chef client, you're using Chef for remediation, it works just fine. As John said, it's not a bad pattern, but it's more effective for people who are already doing remediation than if you're just trying to get your first kind of view into your world.
Yep.
It's a great question, though.
Thanks.
I mean, I don't know if we should call him Brad, but
I don't know if we should call Brad either.
I don't trust that even less now.
So you guys are talking about compliance checking and configuration checking. So when you have a waiver, right, for 90 days, let's say you're not getting evaluated on that. You eventually do, but that runs up. As far as configuration, rollback, how do you put it back to the state that you want it to be in if they're not compliant?
There is no such thing as rollback.
There's no such thing as rollback. It's
Putting
100%
back to
roll forward.
the previous state.
Yeah, so here's the thing. There is no rollback. There is only roll forward, and that's the benefit of the TOML file, right? So like just like we show, so like let's say I accepted this system 100%, right? The state that I want that system to be in is maybe I want this one to now be true, right? So what we would do is, it's as simple as that. I'm now basically creating a new state, and therefore I'm running a new configuration. The important part about this is like, you'll notice that when I run the hebconfig apply command, what I'm doing is that there's the get date piece, right? So what the get date does is it's going to basically be the version of that config as I apply it. And so we could run, did I save it? That's the first thing we should do. We should make sure that we save it. And now it's going to run. And so like, that's that fall forward, right? Now, what I've done is I basically like, my exception is expired, and that's where the automation piece, like a ServiceNow or Remedy or something like that, or some other future system, would allow you to basically like, you're going to set the state for a thing, your 90 days expires, you set it back to what the state is, which is, in this case, a true.
So on the inspect side, it's straightforward, right? We're either going to scan with that control or not. On the remediation side, it's a little bit more complicated depending upon what you're doing, right? This is really where rollback doesn't exist in the desired state world and doesn't really exist in a lot of other places either. But functionally, a great example would be if the control is that you must remove telnet, right? And you have an exception for it, which means you're not firing a chef resource to uninstall telnet. Switching that around, unless you've built the resource to trigger appropriately, it's not going to say, that one might actually would straight up just uninstall, would probably work pretty well. But if it was the inverse, if you said you need to install a thing, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to uninstall it directly because of the waiver, et cetera. So you really have to think very carefully about the individual controls you're working with if you were thinking of the idea of rollback, right? And functionally, the simplest answer to that question is I have a system that is out of compliance or out of policy with my state. I should roll a new system with the new policy, right? Like spending time, energy, effort, hours thinking about how do I build a logic that says, okay, well, if I get into this state, how do I go back to the previous state? No, just give me a new system, right? Yep. Let's save the data somewhere securely, always, and then get our system to be as close to stateless as possible. And like that might sound a little glib, but fundamentally, I don't want to spend any more time troubleshooting. Why the hell didn't that rollback work? Because rollback sucks. That's why it didn't work. I have opinions.
He does.
Cool. Last question.
Heck, I think.
So I've noticed the process that you guys outlined. I mean, essentially, with the true-false flag, you're skipping the control for the exception. Have you guys put any thought into actually creating a new status for an exception as like a new impact to where, because in my mind, I would still want the control to run. I still want to be able to see the state of the setting. And then the example is, maybe they have an exception for a flag to be set to a 2. We want to see if they set it to a 4, right? So I think if we skip it, we lose all that visibility.
So the answer to the question is yes.
Yep.
Yes. So that's one of the things. Like when we built these profiles, we kind of had we had to use what was available at the moment. But yes, we are 100% thinking about things like that, right? There's more. In
particular, what I would say is that the CVSS scoring system that we use, so the 0 to 1 NIST scoring system, right now in Automate that shows up is the version 2 of it, which gives us basically critical, medium, low, skipped. And so the version 3 has a number of other components, including informational only, right, as an impact score. So 100%, we actually literally just talking to our product manager about that this morning, being very clear with him. Hey, you're brand new here, but please, we want this now.
Yeah.
So yeah, 100% behind you on that front, particularly focused on this thing is like some of these things we may just want to skip and not run, But other things, particularly on things that are time-based, I actually do want to run them, and I just don't want them to be impactful from a score standpoint.
Yeah, but the other big thing is like we talk about code and collaboration, right? So like one of the key components of that means that we want to partner with all of you to figure out what that actually looks like, right? If skip is not the thing and it doesn't really work, we need, like, the more that we can understand about what does work and like what you're looking for, the better that we can make these products.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, folks. I think that's time for us. Thank you very much.